So I'm very excited. I'm very excited. I'm Chris Hammond. I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of Narrative Science. Before I start, though, I want to actually comment on something. That we're primarily a Chicago company, and we have a presence in New York that really is mostly business development, and primarily because we actually do a lot of our work with the financial services community, which means New York. And recently, that is over the last summer, we were lucky enough to be one of the graduating class members of the FinTech Lab, which does a tremendous amount of work in terms of working with new companies and introducing them to the financial services community, the banks in particular. And to give you a sense of what this has meant for us, one of our mentors was Credit Suisse. And today I was at Finovate, which is a financial services conference where everybody gets to give a 7-minute demo. One by one, people were getting up on stage doing 7-minute demos of their work. I got to get up on stage and do a 7-minute demo with a fellow who runs the whole division of Credit Suisse, and explained to the audience what our value proposition was. And this was in no small part because of the fact that Credit Suisse was one of our mentors for FinTech. So I would suggest that if you do anything in the financial services community, if you have any aspirations to sell to the financial services community, that you apply and try to become part of the FinTech Lab and move things forward. And in fact, Maria Gotch is here, who is one of the leaders of the FinTech Lab, and I would talk to her if I were you. It has been phenomenal for us. That all being said, and the fact that I do want to run a toaster from Japan, I think I'm out of time. Narrative Science. Just to give me a sense of how our marketing is going. Who has actually heard of Narrative Science? Well, that's not bad. That's not bad. So Narrative Science, we do one thing, and that is we take data, numeric and symbolic data, and we mine it. That is, we have a system called Quill that mines that data for meaning and insight. And once it has found that meaning and insight, it transforms that meaning and insight into narratives, into stories, into English reports that anyone can read. It doesn't matter if they have no analytical skills. It doesn't matter if they can't look at a dashboard and figure out what's going on. It's in English, and they can look at it and read it and understand what's going on at the data level. Which is to say, we take data like this. This is a mix of market data and data around an individual's portfolio, and we create this. That is, an English report on the state of that portfolio on any given day. At the top line, we can talk about what's going on in the market today and how it has impacted that portfolio. We can then expand on that one first lead sentence and talk about what are the individual drivers having to do with the holdings of the person who owns this portfolio. We can dive deeper and we can actually say, well, let's take a look at how you've been doing over the past 30 days, because maybe you don't care so much about what today was all about. Let's take a look at a slightly longer-term view. And finally, we can give you advice. That is, we can take the data as it stands around your portfolio, look for places where there are gaps and opportunities, or places where there are too many costs, and actually give you advice around those costs. Tell you what you might do given the state of your portfolio. The thing about this is that this is for what we refer to as an audience of one. That is that we will create this document, and we create a lot of documents that are like this. We will create this document, and absolutely no one in the entire world will give a damn about this document except one individual. And that is the individual who has this portfolio and has been struggling to figure out exactly what has been going on by looking at spreadsheets, by looking at visualizations, and they've been waiting for that moment when they'll get a communication that actually describes things in a simple, clear, clean English form. For that individual, it's incredibly valuable. But you can't do that with a human being. That is, a human being can't look at the portfolio for 1 million, 2 million customers. and write up a report on a daily basis for each and every one of them. But the machine can do it. And the machine can do it by actually having us take a look at what kinds of analysis is being run against that data, what kinds of recommendations are going to be made, what kinds of trends are happening in that data, how that actual portfolio compares against other portfolios, compares against the market in general. We can do all of that and actually create that report that will go to the individual, and we can create it at outrageous scale. So actually a report like this, which is fairly simple, we can do in easily sub-second time. For our larger reports, we have one report I'll talk to you about a little bit, an 8-page exegesis on an expansion and explanation of a single metric, which takes us about 2 seconds. But that's because it's got a lot of visualization in it, and we render it in PDF. But the actual rendering of the text is almost always sub-second. So where do we come from? I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the company and where we come from, except insofar as how it impacts the technology. We were founded about 3.5 years ago. We're a spin-off of technology that came out of Northwestern University. I'm actually a professor at Northwestern, currently on leave, in computer science, and I think it's very important for understanding the technology and the company, journalism. That is, I'm an adjunct faculty member at the School of Journalism. The core technology actually came out of the intersection of journalism and engineering. And that is, we had teams that were working on problems in journalism with journalists, where we were looking for solutions in technology with computer science students. And one of the problems we decided to look at was content generation based on data analytics. And what we have here now, and as a result of this, is a platform that is driven not by the data alone or the data analytics alone, but is driven by an understanding of what reporting is important, what reporting is interesting, what reporting is needed, what reporting is impactful, which then drives down through the analytics to the data to find the right analysis that will give the report the real meaning that we're looking for. And so we're driven by communication goals, not by the data. We use the data, but we're not driven by it. We have about 50 customers, primarily in financial services now. We have about, 50 employees at this point. And you don't need to know about our patents. But what you do need to know is that the platform is called Quill. So the problem we're looking at. Well, if you think about anyone who's got data, there are very few organizations that are so proud of their data that they say, look at this, we have petabytes of data. And so we're done. Our whole job in terms of monitoring and metering everything we do, gathering data about our clients, our customers, gathering data about our operations, the whole point of that was to get to the data. No one says that. Everyone says the same thing. What we're looking to do is look at that data and figure out what's going on in the world so we can make decisions. We're looking for insights that we can draw from that data. But if you think about the ecosystem that's associated with data, it's actually not aimed at that. The ecosystem is aimed at, well, initially, data platforms that people were using. Data platforms now expanded into the cloud, and so going from SQL to NoSQL databases. Great. So we can gather tremendous amounts of data. BI tools that allow us to do analytics across this swath of data. Terrific. We now have data and big data and data that's been analyzed, so we have more data, and then visualization tools and dashboards, so we can see our data. But the reality is, it's all just data. There's really no insight there. And for those of you who actually make use of dashboards, and I really hope there's no one in the room who actually, in their entire business, is creating dashboards. I really hope that's not the case. For those of you who use dashboards, I am positive you have had the following experience. You have somebody in your organization who needs to know what's going on. And they ask somebody else who understands how to look at that dashboard and interpret what's going on. They need them to look at it and explain it to them. And they don't explain it to them by drawing pictures. They don't explain it to them by giving them a spreadsheet. They explain it to them by telling them in English or other languages. But given the room, English. What we're looking for from the data is insight, and what we get from the data is data. And so what we do is we bridge that gap. We actually go into organizations and understand exactly what their communication needs are, exactly what their data looks like, and we map those communication needs onto the analysis that is needed in order to get the right facts out, figure out which facts are more or less important with regard to that analysis, and actually transform that into reporting that they can use. That means that the individuals who are getting these reports don't have to know anything about analytics. They don't have to know anything about charts. They don't have to know anything about graphs. All they have to be able to do is read. And the system will explain things to them. We can skip this. I'm going to hit on examples. As I said, we do a lot of work in financial services. I'm going to kick this up because I keep stepping on it. We do a lot of work in financial services, and actually, this is a tiny snapshot of one piece of work we do for one of the ratings agencies, and they have a number, and that number is a rating between 1 and 10 about how likely it is that a company is going to default on its debt. They have that number for 35,000 different companies. That number changes every once in a while, depending on the state of the market, the state of the companies, anything that materially changes with regard to that company. They were selling that number. They had a subscription service where you could buy that number, but that number was kind of vacant. It was only a number. And so they would sell the data associated with that number, and it turns out that the number of organizations that could look at that data and look at that number and figure out the relationship between those two was infinitesimally small. Every once in a while, some organization would come to them and say, could you write up what's going on in terms of your reasoning for this company and that number for me? And they would say, sure, we'll actually aim an analyst at it. It'll take us about a week. And one guy would work for a week, put together a document, which, by the way, whenever you ask that question, because something interesting has materially changed for a company, and a week is a long time. So they'll work on that document, and they'll produce it, and they'll deliver it, and they'll charge a lot of money for it. And it's probably ever so slightly stale by the time it gets delivered. They gave us all that data. But by the way, they would do like maybe 1, 2 a week. So 8 a month, about 100 a year. They gave us that data. And we kind of had conversations with their analysts. And we looked at what kinds of analysis they would do. And we mapped that onto our system. And our system can now, on a nightly basis, do the analysis, figure out what the visualization should look like, package that all up into a PDF for all 35,000 companies overnight. This is the example where it takes about 2 seconds. So we were able to take a process that took about a week for an analyst, a high-paid analyst, who actually didn't really like doing this particular aspect of the job, because they're writing down what they know. But they would tell us what they'd know, and we could map it onto the machine, and the machine could actually generate that content in 2 seconds' time. It is actually pretty straightforward language. So Wilmette Valley Vineyards exhibits very low risk based on our exposure scale metric. One of the two components of the exposure scale metric, volatility, declined over the last year with leverage staying level. 2 metrics. Fundamentally, the company has seen improvements in key metrics such as expanded operating margin, higher coverage, so on and so on and so on. Taking core metrics, breaking them down into drivers, and explaining the reasoning that the analysts would do. And I'm going to very quickly, I'm not going to do attribution. This is smaller. This is sub-second. This is actually taking a fund, and when you manage funds, you have to do attribution reports. You have to explain how your fund is doing against a benchmark, and why it's doing so. What decisions you made that make this fund do better or worse than the benchmark. Writing these things up is also, it's not analysts working at the top of their game. It's working at the bottom of their game. But they can take all of what they do, hand it to us, and we can do it for them. So we can actually have the comparison against benchmark, the exposure of the drivers, down to any level of granularity you want. Now, our primary work is in financial services, but I think it's important to understand what the company is and where it's going. Anywhere there is data, anywhere where there is data that tells a story, we can mine that data for the story, and we can tell that story. And this is an example from an earlier client of ours in the educational space, where they were doing online educational training, test training. kids taking tests over and over and over and over again. And they would get back results that would say, you got a 97 in physics, that puts you in the 98th percentile, good job. More importantly, they would say, you did a 72 in biology, that puts you in the 64th percentile, not as good a job, because testing scales, feedback doesn't, until we took the data. And we took the data, and we're able to actually provide feedback that says, in physics, you need to focus on issues of magnetics and electrostatics. You seem to be having problems with some of the basic questions. We know how everybody else did. In these areas that other students are managing well. You should look back to sections 3 to 5 in chapter 7 of the material for magnetics, section 3 in chapter 6 for electrostatics. You need to look there. You look there. Just spend your time looking there. A machine objectively saying, look there, and you will do better. And if you take a look at what's going on in terms of online education, you can scale the presentation. You can scale the testing, but you can't scale the feedback. Oh, unless you use this. And finally, one of my favorite things. There's a piece of work we did about a year ago. We turned our backs on because we were looking at financial services. We have a client that came to us in one of our other primary sectors, and they asked for it. And that is work and social. Twitter has data. It's not really data. It's streams of text. But you can look at those streams of text and you can tag them at some level of granularity. And what we did was we would take conference data, that is all the people who were attending a conference, we'd take their Twitter handles, we'd look at all their tweets, we'd look at their core Twitter data, we'd pull it all together, tag everything, and we'd be able to say, oh, for this conference, these are what these people are interested in. But more important is for every single person who went to that conference, we could say, a big part of any conference is networking. So we thought we'd provide you with some recommendations using the data Quill analyzed. Out of everyone in the conference, Quill chose the people who you might be interested, the 3 people who you might be interested in talking to based upon your respective profiles. Mike Hoskins, DJ Patil, and Donald Farmer. DJ Patil, for me, is particularly interesting. This was mine because he's was the data scientist for LinkedIn. And this actually gave me an excuse to go talk to him. The important thing here is that this connection is not made on the basis of the network. It's not made on the basis of my followers or the people who I follow. It's made on the basis of what I have said and a histogram that profiles me and allows the system to do matchmaking against other people who might be interested in talking with me. I'm going to stop there. The value proposition, if only I had the guy from Credit Suisse in, because he actually explained my value proposition. But it's scale, consistency, audience of one, and being able to tell the story from your data that I swear to you, you can't tell today because you just don't have the people to do it. That's narrative science. Thank you. I have several questions. Any questions? Yes.
So what type of data can Quill eat, I guess, and then
Structured.
Structured.
The most important thing is that the data itself has to be unambiguous as to its meaning. Mm-hmm. So we can't take text. Mm-hmm. With Twitter, we take the text and we tag it and we turn it into structured data. Mm-hmm. But any place where there's structured data, this is why we're in financial services. Mm-hmm. You have huge repositories of unambiguous structured data, tremendous reporting needs, and enough in the way of money so they can pay for actually getting those reports out. And as more and more regulatory issues come up, there's more and more need for reporting, and we can do it. Yes.
What about sort of more the data journalism fields? If you're taking structured data and making stories out of it, couldn't it?
Our starting point was actually media. So, and we still are there. So we actually write stories for football, baseball, soccer, basketball. We're going to do tennis, golf. But yes, any place where there's structure to it, we can tell the story. And the great thing is that, and people are like, how can you do that? And it's like, well, when you see a story about a ball game and somebody says, oh, it was a real come from behind victory, what does that mean? It meant as you look at the score, one team is ahead, and at the end, the other team is ahead. And it's like, oh, that's a come from behind. A back and forth is the lead changes hands. An early victory is the lead, they get the lead and they dominate for the rest of the game. And there's this notion that that a lot of people have a hard time with. But it's a straightforward notion is when we communicate things for a reason. And often that reason is because it's in the data and there's insight that can be drawn from it and turned into language. Yes?
Yeah, are your reports based on templates you create?
Not at all.
Or
Not at all. That's an awesome question. Not at all.
AI?
It's absolutely an AI system. But instead of having the substrate be pure like predicate calculus, most of the substrate is the data analytics. And so we end up with a representation of what's happened, but that representation includes not just the facts, because there are more facts than you'd ever want to say anything about, but facts that are organized and sorted by families of events that are related to each other, and then the importance and interestingness. Importance having to do with the domain. A company goes bankrupt, that's interesting in finance. And then interestingness having to do with the audience. If I don't own any stock in that company, I don't give a damn. It shouldn't be in my portfolio, my portfolio report. But once we've done that, then that feeds into structural elements. And there is some structural similarity, but if you look at story after story after story, you won't look at it and go, oh my God, this is like Mad Libs or templates. It's a very, very different kind of story than you would see in a templated system. Yes?
So if you're looking to work with financial services companies, I'm guessing you're looking to augment what the financial advisor does instead of replace them?
Yes, although it's not just a financial advisor. I mean, it's sort of all aspects of the financial services community. Essentially what we do is I actually am a huge believer in Clay Christensen's notion of how disruption works. That is, you don't go in at the top. There's no way in the world I'm going to go in and talk to somebody who's doing wealth management for exceedingly wealthy individuals and say, you should give them this. But what I will do is say, look, there are places where you have analysts who are spending their time writing reports where they know how to write them. There's nothing new in what they're doing. They're doing borderline commodity work. They don't want to do that. Have us do that, and then they get to actually work at a higher level. They actually get to work at the top of their skill set, think more strategically, do deeper analysis, start doing machine learning against their data sets, and we'll take care of the bottom. And as that next layer gets commodified, we'll go up, and we'll go up, and we'll go up. And that's the way disruption works. Can I have one more?
I guess I have two questions real quick.
Oh.
One. Sorry.
You said one for the for God's sakes, great.
I guess how far do you think you guys are from going from mining structured data to unstructured data? And two, how, I guess, like in your system of, when you're working with Credit Suisse, right?
Yeah.
Are you working with, when variables change from what's important to what's not important, is it the analyst that's going to be able to input into the system what it is, or is they're going to essentially have to tell you?
Two answers. The first is we will not work with unstructured for quite some time. My background is actually in natural language processing and going from unstructured to structure. It's a nightmarish hellhole. The company will not go there. Tagging is one thing, sentiment is another thing, but actually extracting real meaning from utterances, I don't want my team working on for at least a decade. I mean, honest to God. Other people will do it, maybe. They haven't so far. But other people do it, and once they do, we'll take their data and we'll use it. As things change, right now we have a services component to our model, and when things change, they have to give us a call. We are working very hard right now for a particular client to do an on-premise version that's totally self-service, and we're elevating what we do in terms of our tools to actually enable self-service. And I think the primary thing is that it's going to be self-service around existing products. So you tweak a product as opposed to create a product anew. 2 years from now, we'll be creating products anew, and it will be selling the software straightforwardly instead of selling the service. So it's a good question. That is it. Thank you.